Taming the High Cost of College, Ep024.
You have kids, they grow up, and before you know it, it's time to plan for college.
Where do you start?
How much is it going to cost?
Will you qualify for financial aid?
Should you be looking into scholarships?
When will you be able to retire?
What about student loans?
The list of questions is never ending. The good news is, all the answers are right here. Welcome to the Taming the High Cost of College podcast. Here is your host, certified financial planner, Brad Baldridge.
Hello, and welcome to Taming the High Cost of College. I'm your host, Brad Baldridge, and in episode 24, we have an interview here with David Frank. He is the vice president of Athnet, a scholarship and athletic recruiting firm that helps student athletes go on and play their sport in college. And it helps them understand the scholarship landscape and how to be recruited at various colleges across the land. He's going to tell us a lot about how the scholarship system works, and going to get into what a typical scholarship looks like and what athletes should be doing at various times. So a lot of great information. So if you have an athlete that's considering participating in college, this is a great bit of information for you. And then I'm going to answer the question about college visits. I have a question: how much should you do in college visits, and what should you do in a college visit? So I'm going to answer that question as well and talk a little bit about how the college visit process works. As always, the notes for this show are available at tamingthehighcostofcollege/24. So you'll be able to get to all the various links and email and so forth and all the information. So you don't need to be writing it down while you're driving. You can go to the website, tamingthehighcostofcollege/24, and all the information will be there for you. And without any further ado, let's get into the interview with David Frank. Hello, today I'm sitting down with David Frank. He's the vice president at Athnet, a company that helps high school athletes go on to become college athletes. Welcome, David.
Hi, thank you, Brad. Thanks for taking the time to speak with me today.
My pleasure. So I guess before we get into the whole athletic scene, let's talk a little bit about how you got involved in the athletic world and a little bit about your company.
Sure. So our company, Athnet, has been in the sports recruiting business for 15 years. It got its start when the internet really came into being. And what we first used to do is help athletes connect with coaches online. And the majority of the time that was through email. Over the last few years, we've transitioned away from the email-based recruiting to online profiles that help athletes gain exposure to college coaches and reach the programs that traditionally they might not have been able to reach in the recruiting process.
Okay. So how did you get involved in the athletic? Are you a former athlete, or how,
Yeah, so my background was I was a former college athlete. I got myself recruited, and at the time it was as simple as I was emailing coaches at the schools I was interested in and found an opportunity to go and compete in the NCAA Division II level as a golfer. And while I was at that school, I met my boss, Mike Lancaster, who had started Athnet. And once we found out, we'd both gotten ourselves recruited in a similar fashion through email. And that's what Athnet was doing at the time. And so it made a lot of sense to me. I understood the value of it right away. And once I got involved with Athnet after that, we began to see that recruiting was evolving beyond emailing coaches. As more people began to do that, it wasn't a channel to the coaches like it used to be. So we moved to online profiles, which have been really successful in helping coaches and athletes connect, and athletes get evaluated by coaches.
You just mentioned an online profile. I guess for those of us that aren't that involved in the recruiting process, what does a typical profile entail, or describe it for us?
So the best way I can describe it is that we want to create an opportunity for college coaches to discover athletes that they would be interested in. So an athlete has a profile in our system that highlights things like their height, their weight, sport-specific stats, and their academics. And then college coaches can come into our system and they can query for athletes based on that information. So a typical query for a football coach might be they want every athlete within a certain number of states who is 6 foot and has a GPA of 3.5 and above and play a certain position. And so a coach can come in there, they can see all these profiles. These profiles are going to have the info they need on the athlete, as well as a video, so the coach can watch the video, get a sense for that athlete, and then choose to contact them or not. And so what that does is it makes the recruiting process a countrywide opportunity for coaches, where traditionally they were defined in their recruiting by their regional limitations and how far they could travel.
Right. So if I'm a parent of an athlete and I'm interested in getting involved with this recruiting process. How much does it cost, or is there cost involved? Should I be even spending money on this?
There are costs associated with youth sports. I think that gone are the days when it was just going to be the free high school team and that was going to be what the athlete needed to get the exposure. Every sport has evolved into the club level. And as athletes, the elite athletes begin to identify themselves, they're encouraged to play their sport year-round, or they're encouraged to play on these elite travel teams during the summer. And so what our profiles offer is an opportunity to really capitalize on the investments you're already making in an athlete's sports. We do offer our profiles for free, and that's to ensure that college coaches are using our system and finding it as helpful as possible and getting the most athletes on. There are paid opportunities within our profiles, which is getting your videos made, getting the SAT test prep, or maybe the one-on-one help with our recruiting coaches, which is going to be, that's an individual assigned to you and your athlete who really get to know what you're looking for and can help you break down some of the communications you're having with college coaches. You know, there's a range of opportunities out there with these online profiles, but fundamentally what you're looking for is a profile system that's used by a lot of coaches. And that's why we offer the free online profiles that ensures that we keep every college coach searching our database and identifying recruits.
Okay. Let's say I'm just starting out. I've got, I don't know, a sophomore. Maybe he's a boy. He plays baseball well and football okay. And he's thinking, well, I'm going to play baseball in college. I'd like to, or potentially. What are the first steps?
I think it's the most important step is, as a family, having the discussion about how committed the athlete wants to be to playing that sport. You'll hear a lot that athletes are being pressured to pick one sport very early on. And I think that's a trend that's going to continue. You can debate whether or not that's the right move to make, but unfortunately, the facts are the elite athletes are committing to sports early on, playing year-round, which is giving them increased opportunity to get seen and get evaluated by college coaches. So as a family, if you've reached that decision, if the athlete and the family have committed to the sport that athlete likes the most, I think you're going to have to look into the system that works for the family. So that means, you know, playing the high school ball, but also looking for the travel team and the showcases that are going to provide them that year-round opportunity to play. And once you've identified, you know, the travel teams you want to play for, it's about interviewing those coaches and asking their questions that fit kind of what the expectations are for the athlete and the family.
So I guess to summarize what you've said there is a lot of athletes are now focusing on a sport in their high school years, and therefore I guess there's a couple of issues with that. One is they get more exposure, but also probably the opportunity to become a better athlete in their chosen sport because they're so focused on it. Is that true?
Yeah, that's the idea behind committing to a single sport earlier, is that the year-round training allows them to get better sooner and catch the attention of college coaches. As an organization, we don't want to pressure an athlete or a family into making that decision. It's something that every family should make for themselves. I think there's value in both of playing multiple sports and committing to a sport earlier. But the idea behind playing the single sport is that it's increased practice time, increased specialty, and more opportunities to get discovered by the coaches who will be, you know, combing the country looking for recruits.
Okay. So I think that boils down, you know, I see that similarly in other areas like, you know, SAT or ACT test prep. Do you have to do it? Well, certainly not. You can just do other things. However, your competition is doing it, and therefore you may you may want to do it in order just to keep up. Whether or not, and you mentioned earlier too, whether philosophically if it's good or bad, that's irrelevant to some extent because that's just what they're doing. So if you want to keep up, you may need to focus, or you may choose not to. I understand it's obviously the family's decision. So as we're moving through the process now, I think a lot of people are saying, well, gee, you know, little Johnny is really good at football, and therefore he's going to go win a big scholarship, and we don't have to worry about paying for college. I think that's a myth out there, and I understand it's a myth, but can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, certainly. So the most important thing when you're identifying the possibility of a scholarship paying for college is to get a look at the scholarship landscape for the sport that your athlete competes in. And it's really, really different depending on the sport that you play. So an athlete playing football, that is, quote unquote, the best scholarship opportunity. if you look at the pure number of scholarships available. So a major Division I football program has 85 scholarships available. That means they have 85 full ride scholarships available to their athletes. Compared to a sport like baseball, where you're going to have 30 plus athletes on the team, and a fully funded program is going to have 12 scholarships total. And those scholarships are usually divided up into half or quarter scholarships so that more athletes get some money. And you can begin to see how different of a scholarship landscape it's going to be depending on the sport you're playing. So it's important to set your expectations on a scholarship based on how many scholarships are available to an athlete on a team, and how common it is that an athlete actually has a full scholarship or a scholarship at all for their sport.
Okay, so let's go back to that baseball example. So there's 12 potential full scholarships, but the coach is allowed to divide them among his athletes. So if he was going to be completely fair, it would be 12 scholarships divided by 30 students, so a little under half. Okay, a little under half of what? Tuition room and board, the whole cost?
So currently, the scholarships cover full cost of tuition, room, and board. And so, and oftentimes they get divided up where everybody gets, part of their tuition covered, or everybody might get books covered. So, the scholarship is intended to cover the full cost of attending college.
Okay. Now, in practice, obviously the coaches probably aren't fair. They don't divide them equally among the team. So what would be typical? Would it be, star athletes get more and the rest don't get any, or?
Each program's a little bit different on how they might offer scholarships, but in general, baseball in particular, the money goes to pitchers first, and then really valuable hitters. Then scholarships might go to a really valuable position player who's also a good hitter, and if there's anything left over, maybe somebody out in the outfield. But again, they have a skill set that makes them really unique. It's not common where a coach is going to divide up scholarships evenly across the team. The big money goes to, like I said, the pitchers, and so you'll often see, the pitching staff gets the lion's share of scholarships, and then the best position players or hitters are going to get another good chunk, and maybe somebody else gets their books covered as sort of, a thank you for what you're doing, but on the bottom line of how much school is costing, it's really not going to make that big of a difference.
Okay. So, and I would assume other sports, you say pitchers for baseball, but other sports probably have their key positions and key athletes and the rest, so to speak, as well. Would that be true?
Yeah. And besides the key positions, another common breakdown would be that, the money's going to the seniors, and the juniors, freshmen and sophomores aren't going to have as big of scholarships because they're not playing as prominent a role on the team. So, a lot of times scholarship money is broken up by playing time as well. So the athletes who are starters, who are playing the most minutes or the most games, in general, they're going to see bigger scholarships. And so if you're coming in as a freshman or a sophomore, the expectation for a scholarship, you just need to understand that it's really not as common to be getting a scholarship your first few years in college as you might think.
Right. And then, of course, there's the different types of colleges, and some offer scholarships and some can't even. So can you speak to that a little bit? Yeah,
certainly. So scholarships are offered at the NCAA Division I, Division II, and NAIA colleges. The NCAA Division III level doesn't offer athletic scholarships. And this you can also group in Ivy League schools. So Ivy League and NCAA Division III don't offer athletic scholarships, but there are other forms of financial aid that they can make available to athletes. There's opportunities for some Division III schools are able to offer athletes certain breaks on the tuition because of their standing as an athlete. It's not considered a scholarship. It might be considered something else. It wouldn't be the same as signing an athletic scholarship like you would at a D1 or a D2 school.
Okay, so there's other financial benefits potentially of being part of the athletics, even at a school that's not offering you a scholarship.
Yeah, and one of the common areas when you're dealing with some of the top academic institutions, like you might see at an Ivy or some Division III schools, is that athletes are giving preferential treatment in the highly competitive admissions process. And so, the benefit of being an athlete is that college coach is going to walk your admissions packet through admissions, and the likelihood of you getting in is much higher than had you not been an athlete who's been tapped by that college coach. And so that's another thing to keep in mind if you're targeting these elite institutions, is it's another way to get recognized in admissions and maybe get through that highly competitive process.
Okay, right. So that brings me to another question. Obviously, there's the tangible financial benefits, but there's a lot of other potential benefits. And since you were an athlete, maybe you can speak to this as well. But even if you're not going to get financially rewarded to be an athlete, what are the other benefits or positives to being involved in athletics in college?
Beyond just the traditional sport benefits, I'll speak more directly to the benefits you might see on campus. So a lot of schools will have unique housing that's available just for the athletes, which can create a camaraderie and sort of an instant group of friends that really helps an athlete adjust to the times in college. They get a lot of academic support from their athletic department, things like preferential signups for classes, so you can get into highly competitive classes or time slots for classes. You can get academic tutoring that really helps you. You're going to be very busy as an athlete with all your practice and travel hours, but there's tremendous amounts of support available to you in getting tutors. And then the network that comes with being part of being an athlete at a school. It's one of those things that when you're done with school, you can go back and you always have kind of the bond with not just your team, but other athletes. And I think it's, like I said, it's the social group that's there, and you're plugged right into it, where, when you're coming as a high school kid coming to an area where maybe they've never been, it's a ready group of friends and can really help you adjust.
Yes. And then I always tell parents too that, there's certainly a sports subculture out there where it may help you get to your first interview. It may help you get a job. There's a lot of companies and recruiters out there that will give preferential treatment to athletes or former athletes because they know potentially how much extra they had to put into their experience. And if they did it successfully, again, they might have a bias that just says, well, I'm willing to give athletes the benefit of the doubt, especially if the hiring managers, et cetera, are athletes themselves.
Yeah, certainly. That's something that is increasingly what we're seeing is athletes are sought out in the workplace. That if you look at the track record, that a lot of the major corporations, the executive level and the higher ups, they were college athletes. They are competitive. They know what it means to put in the hard work and to play as a team. And you're right, HR recruiters are taking notice, and they're increasingly being asked to find athletes when they're looking for job candidates.
Right. So obviously that's all the good stuff. What about some of the bad stuff? And then the big one that I can think of is time commitment. What is the time commitment, or what are the other negatives to choosing to get involved in athletics?
Well, the concerns right now, and I think it's important to understand that the college landscape and what scholarships are and what they mean and how safe they are is in flux right now. That the college model through the NCAA, there's a lot of debate about, is it the right model? Are scholarships being used in the right way? And so everything I might say about some of the potential risks of scholarships could change in a couple of years, but it's important to understand what they are right now. And that is that scholarships are not guaranteed year to year. And that's perhaps the biggest risk that you run as an athlete, especially somebody who's relying on that scholarship as financial aid, that if you get injured, if your coach gets fired, or if you're just not able to perform at the level that coach thought you were able to perform at, there's an opportunity for you to lose your scholarship or get your scholarship reduced. If you get injured, there's a potential that you can't play your sport anymore, and how much of your injury and rehab will be covered by your college. These are all risks that the college model is trying to address better, but currently it's a valid concern that an athlete could lose his scholarship under those scenarios. And you need to be prepared as a family, as a backup plan or a contingency plan on what you can do if you do lose the scholarship.
So what about time commitment? Let's use a specific example. Let's say your time commitment. You were obviously on a golf team, it sounds like.
Yeah.
So when was the golf season? Was it spring or fall or?
Well, golf actually, as a college sport, has the most time away from classes than any other sport because we play a fall and a spring. Traditionally, we play our tournaments on like a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, which means we're away from school, whereas a lot of sports might try and play on a Friday, Saturday.
Okay.
So the time commitments, I think an important point to understand is if you have a major in mind that you want, you need to discuss that with the coach or with the program before you're an athlete there. That certain majors might have a lab class or a Friday or an evening class that competes with your practice schedule that you won't be able to do both. And it's important that you understand that before going into a school. So when you're considering colleges and when you're considering majors, you want to discuss what your intended field of study is with the coach and with maybe athletes already on the team to find out if that's even a possibility. So an example for me, when I was in school, I was studying marine biology, and there was just going to be no way that I could take the Friday lab classes and still be able to play on the golf team. And so what I ended up doing was changing my major. It was still in the sciences, but didn't have the same overlap of a lab class. And I was able to study something I liked and enjoyed, but I had to make the decision at that point, was it sports or that intended major, because of the conflict of schedule.
Okay. So, and then what's the typical time commitment, or maybe there is no typical, but what kind of time commitment off season? So if you're actively pursuing and practicing, prepping for a season and then participating in the season, but then when the season's over, what is the typical time commitment?
It really depends on the sport and on the college coach and what their expectations are for an off-season fitness program. If we're looking at baseball, it's pretty common for a lot of these athletes to go and play what's called wood bat leagues, which are just a summer league for college players to go and play at kind of like a minor league system, wooden bat level of baseball. And then you've got golfers that are going to play a pretty extensive off-season schedule of tournaments. Sports like running, cross-country, track, football, they all have, those coaches are going to hand out pretty specific training programs for the summer. So those aren't hours counted towards, your training in the school, but those are just sort of implied that you're doing these things to be prepared for the next season. Okay,
good. So what about academics? NCAA rules, I mean, you're academically ineligible. So, tell us what are the rules there?
So there's a basic level of academic preparedness that the NCAA asks every athlete to meet. And so that is a 2.3 GPA that matches up with a certain level of SAT or ACT test scores. And that 2.3 GPA has to come from what they call 16 core courses. So it's a matchup of specific courses, English, math, political science, that sort of thing, that ensures that athlete meets the academic minimum. An important distinction is that academic minimum doesn't guarantee you admissions into any program that you want. And so while a college coach might say, yes, you're NCAA eligible, but your 2.5 GPA, I can't get you into admissions in my school. So it doesn't matter if you're NCAA eligible if you don't meet the requirements of the school. And that's why I like to encourage athletes to establish an academic barrier or goal with the colleges and the coaches that they're talking to ensure that they don't run into that situation where they think they're NCAA eligible or they are NCAA eligible, but they're not going to be able to become a student at that school.
Right. And I think if you've studied athletics at all, people are aware of the abuses of, some of the top college programs, especially in the money sports, basketball and football. There's a lot of students that ultimately never graduate, and I think their athletic career is their attempt to go pro potentially, or at least that's what they think they're going to do. Or, and if they don't make it to pro, and they don't graduate either, so they're just kind of in the lurch. I don't think most parents want that for their children. So how do you protect yourself from that, or is there some validity to that?
Yeah, I think that really comes down to the values set by the family. That as long as the families are continuing to focus on academics and that sports is going to be the vehicle to further your academics, you don't run into that issue. The problems that I see is when athletes are only looking at academics as a necessary evil to get them to their pro career. And in that situation, you have a student athlete who's not valuing the opportunity to get their education, and they do end up in this situation like you identified where they've only done the bare minimum to be able to continue to play their sport, and as soon as they think they can go pro or anything like that, they're going to walk away, and they're going to be left with maybe a failed pro career and no college education. So it's a value set by the family and a commitment made to academics early on in the high school process that will probably carry that athlete through college.
Right. We had a coach at a local college here that retired, and one of the things that was said about the coach is she was a girls basketball coach, I believe, and she was very proud of the fact that she had a pretty strong winning record. But then on top of that, she said, and by the way, my athletes had an average GPA of 3.5. Mm-hmm. So can you ask coaches about what their academic opinions are? And I mean, or is that kind of taboo that they're not really concerned about your academics?
I think it's a general rule of thumb is the more competitive the college is, or the more pressure that coach is feeling to win, the more likely they are to not allow an athlete to commit to their academics as much. So by no means is this true for all major college sports, but in general, if a college coach is going to bring you in to play at his top level NCAA Division I, they're not going to be very accommodating to an athlete who might want to stay and study a little extra or take a really complex major. And so that's an important consideration for an athlete who might be fortunate enough to be playing at the top level of college sports is you need to have this conversation with the coach and let them know that you want to take a certain major, or you know how important academics are going to be to you. And you'll find coaches that will support an athlete 100% in those pursuits, but you'll also find a program that has 50% of their athletes are taking one particular kind of major, and the coaches don't seem overly committed or are aloof about their athletes' academic records, and that might raise a red flag for a family who is looking for a program that balances athletics and academics.
Right. So when I'm advising parents too, I tell them that, there's certain things that the student needs to be involved in. They need to figure out what the commitment is and figure out if they can work with that type of coach and all that kind of stuff. But I always tell parents it's their job to protect the student from, don't let the athletics use the student, have the student use athletics. And that's a big difference. So I always encourage parents to be the one that asks the tough questions and delve into the academics and understand poor graduation rates at a particular program and why is that, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And like you said about the local basketball coach there, if a coach is willing to talk about academic performance, that's a good sign that they're committed to the academics. A college coach who's going to say, yeah, our team is eligible to compete, that doesn't necessarily mean they're committed to academics. It just means they want to make sure that they can keep playing every year. And that's something that only can come up in asking the tough questions.
Okay. So a little earlier you mentioned something about if you're fortunate enough to compete at the highest level. How do you know if you're able to compete at the highest level or the second highest level, or how do you know where you fit in the pecking order, so to speak?
That's the $1 million question when it comes to recruiting. I think that most families, they look at the opportunity to play college sports as the big time college sports. And so how do they end up at the Division II level? Well, a lot of it comes down to, the marketplace of recruiting is going to let you know where you fit in. The more you get into the games or the competitive games and levels with other college recruits, you'll begin to identify where you stack up. If you're playing against elite competition and you're playing very, very well, you'll get a sense that that's where you belong. If you're playing against elite competition and you're doing okay, but they're consistently better than you, then that's probably where you're going to pan out in the recruiting process. And besides all of that, once you begin engaging with college coaches at the right level are going to be contacting you. So if you're getting contact from NAIA or Division II schools, but you really, really think you're a Division I athlete, maybe you need to reevaluate what it is that you think or why it is that you think you're Division I. Take a good hard look at the recruits at Division I or the top level. How big are they? What are their times? What are their best marks? And get a sense for where you match up against them.
Right. I think, because I have a lot of parents that say that essentially, well, we think, we have a sophomore. We think they're good. They play varsity. How else can we, do our parents a good judge, or should they get outside help, or what do you think?
Parents can be a good judge, but in general, I think that they're a bit biased, and that's perfectly acceptable. You're a parent. You should be biased towards your kid. I think the best opportunity is, if you feel comfortable with your high school coaches and your club level coaches, is to engage them in the conversation. If they're a program that has traditionally sent athletes to the college level, they can give you a good sense for where you stack up. If you don't have a college coach, or if you don't have a club coach or a high school coach who can do that, there are services like ours where we have, recruiters who have been matching athletes up with colleges for a long time, and we can give an unbiased opinion about where you might stack up. And then finally, you can do pretty extensive research online. So for a sport like baseball, what I always encourage a parent to do to get a sense for what it takes to play for a certain school is go to the roster for that team and look at the bios for those athletes. How big are they? What programs were they playing in? Were they Gatorade All-Americans, or were they Under Armour All-Americans? If you've got a roster that's stacked full of that type of talent, or athletes that are consistently 3 to 4 inches and 30 pounds heavier than your athlete, then it's a pretty good indication that that program is looking for a certain level of recruit and that maybe that level isn't right for your athlete. You can learn a lot by researching the rosters of the teams you're interested in.
Right. Okay. So when do you get started in all this? Obviously, you provide a free service. When should I be taking advantage of your free service? And as far as, if I have a high school sophomore, is that when we start, or what's the timeline typically?
So the recruiting process has continued to speed up. When we started, we would recommend that somebody could, begin kind of looking into it in their freshman year, and by their sophomore year, they might start to develop their list of schools. And now it's to the point where, especially in the female sports where the recruiting process, where the athletes maybe develop a little bit sooner, you really need to be prepared to make recruiting decisions in your freshman and sophomore year. For a lot of female sports, you're seeing athletes, for the top schools, you're seeing athletes get offers in their 8th and 9th and 10th grade year because these college coaches are under pressure to lock down what they think are the best recruits. For boys sports, because they tend to develop later, the recruiting process is a little bit slower. So you're seeing commitments being made by sophomore, junior, and still sometimes the senior year. But the process of identifying recruits is definitely starting once high school starts.
Okay. And I think you kind of implied that that's for the top athlete, maybe the top Division I athletes. What if you're not that good? And obviously the Yahoo Sports and some of those places, they identify the 8th grader that has been recruited by colleges, but that's one in the city or one in a state potentially. What about the rest? I mean, is there a too soon or a too late?
It's not too soon, but what you'll find is if an athlete's contacting a Division II coach or a Division III coach, that coach will respond in a couple of ways. One, they might just say, look, we know who you are, or we've seen you play, and we think that you're more talented than this level, and you'll find an opportunity at a higher division level. The other thing is a coach at the Division II, he's waiting to see who is committing and locking in at the Division I level, and then that's going to change who he's able to offer and give scholarship opportunities to. And so their recruiting process is really controlled by the commitments made at the top level of college sports, and it sort of trickles down from there. So an athlete might commit to a Division II school in their junior year if that coach and that athlete really know that that's the right fit. But in general, that recruiting process is still going on into the senior year as those coaches are waiting to see how the top level of recruits all shake out.
Okay. Now, what if we're rolling into start of school right now. So what if I have a senior right now that, has been playing varsity for 3 years? I believe he's a strong athlete, but we're not getting much interest from coaches. Mm-hmm. Is it too late, or what can we do?
Yeah, it's certainly not too late, but you're under the crunch. You're under the gun to really get commitments and to get exposure to college coaches. I think traditionally athletes or families that we find in that position have been assuming that their high school coach or their club team coach is getting them exposure, and for one reason or another that they're just not getting the opportunities that they expect. And that's where they really need to take a proactive role. So getting a profile on a site like ours can help, getting the video, getting the stats uploaded. But then it's also really turning around and making that list of 30 to 40 to 50 schools that you have some initial interest in, and writing the emails and just getting in front of those coaches, calling them, emailing them. The nice thing about contacting coaches as a senior is that college coaches can respond back to you if they're interested. And so if you're going to email a coach, send them your video, write a proper email introduction, and they watch that video, they can respond to you and let you know what the opportunities are available.
All right. Well, great. Well, I think we're going to wrap things up, but before I let you go, I always ask my guests to give us 3 quick tips. And they could be related to stuff we've already talked about, or they could be tips about other things. So what are 3 things that parents and students should be kind of doing to make life a little easier for them?
Well, I think the first is set the expectation on what you want from sports as a family, and then go to that goal. Don't go to the goal of getting famous or getting the biggest scholarship. Use sports to do and accomplish the things that you want as a family. Second to that is always pick the school that you would like to go to, even if you weren't an athlete there. And finally, you have to have fun. You have to have fun in this process, and you have to learn how to do the challenging things and how as an athlete, sometimes you're going to be asked, or as a family, you're going to be asked to make decisions that are uncomfortable, but that's all part of the process of recruiting, and try to maintain a good attitude about it, even when the stressful moments of scholarship commitments are coming down.
All right, great. Well, you gave us a wealth of information. If people want to learn more about your company or contact you, can you give us some of the contact information?
Yeah, certainly. So our website, athleticscholarships.net, is where a lot of our information and our blog is hosted. My contact information is just simply my email is david@athleticscholarships.net. I'm always free on email and happy to help athletes get connected with the resources that would suit them best.
All right. Thanks for the great information, and I'm sure we'll talk again.
All right. Thank you, Brad.
Thank you.
Have a question? Brad is accepting questions from his listeners now. Record a question at tamingthehighcostofcollege.com and get it answered on one of the future episodes.
Today's question comes from a meeting I had with a client last night, and the question came up of how to do or how many visits should we do, and how do we visit colleges? So to answer that question of what we should be doing as far as college visits, I need to explain a little bit more about the overall process. And to start with, there's 3 types of college visits in my book. Well, actually, there's 4, but the 3 important types would be the preliminary visit, which is a visit where you are just starting to gather information. You might take the walking tour. You might get involved in a group session where they give a presentation about financial aid and the application process. And it's your chance to get your feet wet at a number of colleges. A lot of times families, at least I recommend, that you go to local colleges for this type of visit. Again, just to kind of get started, to learn what a visit is like, to learn the basic information that a lot of colleges can provide. And a lot of the basic information is transferable. If you visit the local private college, even though you don't intend to go there, they're going to teach you a lot about the college process. Then when you are actually traveling to schools you are interested in, you'll have a little bit more knowledge and you'll be able to ask better questions. So that's kind of the preliminary visit. Preliminary visits for a lot of families are in the junior year of high school, perhaps even a little sooner for some if you've got a lot of schools on your list or potentially a lot of schools. And for some families, preliminary visits stretch into the early part of the senior year as well. Next, we have the in-depth visit. The in-depth visit is where you are on campus perhaps for almost the entire day, where you may, again, be part of the group tour and the walking tour and some of that stuff, but you also might get specific information for your particular major or visit particular classes that are relevant to you, talk with a financial aid officer, talk with an admissions officer, talking to somebody in the placement office, talk to somebody in the athletic department if that's important to you. Again, talk to a department head where you're actually spending most of a day learning a lot about a college. And this might be a secondary visit where maybe you've already done a preliminary visit at this college. Now you're going back because it's still a strong candidate and you want to learn more. Or you might do this type of visit as the one and only visit, especially if you're traveling. If you're driving cross country or flying across country to do this visit, you probably want to do an in-depth visit when you're there, especially if the school is still in the running. Then the last type of visit is what I call the accepted senior visit. Late in your senior year in April and May, when it's decision time, high school seniors at some colleges have the opportunity to go back and visit one more time to help them make the final decision. A lot of colleges offer these visits because it's a way for the college, if they can get you to come to campus, they most likely can get you to sign up and attend the school. So they're happy to have, as part of their recruiting, they're happy to provide these types of visits. And a lot of times these visits might be an overnight stay where you shadow a student and you eat in the dining halls and you sleep in a dorm and you visit with a number of professors and you learn a whole lot more than you would than even in an in-depth visit. And again, the accepted senior visit, a lot of times it's just the student doing all these things. And mom and dad might need to find other accommodations. So those are the 3 main types of visits. And then the last visit that I talk a little bit about, it's not really what I recommend people do. It's what I call the stealth visit. The stealth visit is when you go to a college campus, you drive onto campus, you get out of the car, you look at a bunch of old buildings, you get back in the car and you drive away, and nobody even knew you were there. And again, that might be fine very early on, but that's not a visit that would count in my book. If you did a stealth visit at a college and it was still on the list, then you need to go back and do some of the other types of visits to learn more about the college. Because realistically, a lot of old buildings at a lot of colleges all start to look the same, and you really want to get a flavor for the students and the faculty and the programs and the clubs and all the other stuff that you really can't learn about in a stealth visit. So families need to build what I call a visit plan, which is, for some families, it's not a big deal because you're going to visit 2 or 3 of the local colleges and compare the state school to the local private school. Or maybe there's 4 or 5. But some families get more and more complex where they intend to apply to 8 schools and visit 10 or 12 or more. And for some families, it's a road trip to the East Coast or West Coast or to the Midwest if you're already on one of the coasts, where you're traveling to visit schools in different directions. If that's something that's going to be likely for your student, then you need to kind of plan ahead and say, all right, well, we're going to do this trip during spring break of our junior year. We're going to do that trip during the summer of our junior year. We're going to go here, we're going to go there, and it can be a lot more involved. I've actually had a few students where they've considered and did an in-depth look at 40 or so colleges and built a big spreadsheet where they had all kinds of data and information on a lot of different colleges. And that's just the type of student they were. I've had other families where they said, well, we're just going to visit these 3 or 4. We're going to pick one and we're going to be done. Both of those methods are okay. It's up to your family as far as what's going to be right for you, as far as how much time and effort you want to spend in the visit process prior to applying to colleges. Another idea I have is there's what's called virtual tours now. The technology of the internet has made it possible to learn a lot about a college and actually take a virtual tour. And I talked about it a lot in podcast 18, where you can go back to Taming the High Cost of College /18. I interviewed Chris Carson of Virtual Tours. There's a couple of companies out there now that provide virtual tours for colleges, and you're able to, sit at your computer and watch videos about a particular college or see pictures and get other types of information. But as Chris mentioned in the interview, it's a good preliminary visit, but it doesn't really replace the in-depth visit of actually being there. But it might be a way for you to save a little time and avoid a road trip to a college that isn't going to be a good fit, and you can tell that relatively quickly by perhaps you doing the virtual tour. So as an example, let's say you're planning a road trip out to the Boston area. Well, there's a lot of colleges out there, and a typical road trip, maybe you can visit 3, 4, 5 colleges, and there's 7 or 8 on your list. Perhaps you could use the virtual tours to narrow it down to the schools that are more likely to be a good fit and pick those schools for the in-depth visit. All right, so that's all we have on visits. Bottom line is you need to think it through and plan accordingly. And that ends our podcast for today. I appreciate you guys listening out there. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to contact us. I can be reached at tamingthehighcostofcollege.com/questions, and that's your opportunity to send us questions that we can answer here on the podcast or get back to you directly if we need to. Also, you can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes and Stitcher if you would like, and that way you'll get every episode as they become available. That's all for now. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Taming the High Cost of College podcast. Now it's time for you to take action. Head to tamingthehighcostofcollege.com for show notes, bonus content, and to leave feedback for Brad. The next step on your college journey starts now.
Brad Baldridge is a registered representative of Cambridge Investment Research and an investment advisor representative of Cambridge Investment Research Advisors, a registered investment advisor. Securities are offered through Cambridge Investment Research Incorporated, a broker-dealer and member of FINRA and SIPC. Brad owns 2 companies, Baldridge Wealth Management and Baldridge College Solutions. The Baldridge companies are not affiliated with Cambridge Investment Research.